Hey everyone, welcome to the Incubator Podcast. I'm your co-host, Darren Boyd.
And this is Satbir, Sran. Thank you very much for tuning in today. We're excited to bring to you Mel Reyes. Mel Reyes is a global CIO, global CISO, founder of Digital Guardians as well, and a community contributor, activist, if you will, in the technology domain, and also sits on a number of variety of board positions. Welcome, Mel. How are you?
I am ecstatic to be here, living the dream, and thank you for having me on.
Thank you, Mel. Before we dive in, Mel, maybe you could expand a little bit more about your background and your experience for our audience, and then we'll get into some of the things you've seen as a global CIO CISO.
Absolutely. Again, thank you. I tell folks that I have lived through the IT and security drama for the last 30 years. I used to say 25, but I'm kind of owning up to my age. Really, everything from building out systems as a CIO, optimizing, to fraud management at the enterprise level, and have been through probably more compliance headaches than anything. From high trust to PCI to ISO and everything else, at manufacturing groups, at fintechs, as well as startups. So I've seen a lot of the noise at a lot of different levels, and just love the challenge, love to build out teams, and honored to be here, gentlemen.
Great. Thank you, Mel. So maybe we start out from some of the points you just highlighted, Mel. We're in a changing world, a lot of things evolving. Cyber is always evolving on different threats, different compliance aspects and mandates. What would you say as a CISO were some of your top themes or focus areas in the recent past?
So most recently, I've been focusing on the management and leadership skills around security operations, around network operations, JSOCs, et cetera, and being able to reduce the churn, reduce the burnout. It's evident across the whole industry with every incident that comes up. It's a cascading butterfly effect. Everybody else gets tense. Everybody has to do more research, more reporting. But in reality, the flip side of that is just getting baseline things in organizations, right? Building out the culture, building out the right set of tools, the right visibility. So there's still a maturity model, depending on the company that you're at, that you have to go through. And I'm seeing the toxicity of the burnout on one end, and the ever so creative challenges of building out a culture that is really a security mindset. Really, really surprised this year to still hear companies talking about building out an AppSec program, right? I like that. Always surprises me when I get on a panel or get on in a call. I'm like, wait, what? You don't have an AppSec program? What year are you in? So there's still a lot of varying things that I see out there.
Yeah, I would. I'd love to dive into some of that, because I too often, you're right, people don't focus on the human factors that are behind any program, and we certainly don't spend enough time on it. If you subscribe to the idea that most anything we do is touching an interface, behind those interfaces or in front of them are humans, then I don't think we do enough to develop these people because you're right, under periods of stress, under incident, either analysis or some sort of response, we have to do more to equip these people. If we could start maybe there, when you come into an organization and you're taking this over, I imagine this is one of the key areas that you focus on. How do you start to approach looking at what a culture is, kind of ideating around what you want it to be, and how do you start to get there as you take over the helm?
So I'm going to try not to get myself in trouble, but typically, even before you start, you can get a really good idea of a culture, right? Through whatever process you're being put through or otherwise. And the real question is, just like any security program, just like any major data lake program, RPA program, does it have top-down support? Right. And if it does, the change, the cultural, the advancement, then you're in a good place. Right. If it's a light touch of corporate mandates that the top down are handing you, then you have a challenge, right? Because you're going to be fighting an uphill battle, or as I like to say, swimming in a cold sea of molasses, right? You know what you need to do. You've got the ability to be able to pull the resources. You know how to gauge talent, but you're just swimming in this really slow process, a legacy kind of mindset. So the first thing that I try to do is, and it's all the basic things in leadership, right? Number one, I got to build trust, right? You've got to trust that I'm going to work collaboratively to pull the teams together to make sure that I can leverage the talent that's there. But then I got to look out for the landmines, right? I've got to look out for this is how we've done it. We don't have budget. We can't do that, right? So if I hear woulda, shoulda, coulda, can't, I'm like, oh, that's a target area. Like, why, right? And I post this everywhere. Why? Ask the 5 whys, right? And try to work with the teams, try to enable the teams, and try to do whatever I can. A lot of the strategies that I can come up with my head could be vaporware if I don't build trust, if I don't understand the landscape, if I don't really understand the talent, and I don't have that management support. So all of these sound like soft skills, but at the end of the day, they get down in technical. Right? They get down to whether or not we continue to scrape logs. Do we continue the tools that we're using? Are we over alerting? Right? All of the tactical things are so important. So when I get on calls with people and they start talking in the Charlie Brown teacher mode, right? Wah, compliance, wah, ISO 27001. I'm like, okay, great, but what are we actually going to do? Right? What are we going to actually change to get, the change that we want cascading up, right? So the strategy is great, but what are you actually going to do? So I work with a lot of different groups, a lot of different folks with the tool sets, really getting open source involved, getting the true 80-20 kind of mindset. It's like, or having the teams contribute as much as possible, flipping teams, right? I do all kinds of different techniques on whether or not they're an innovation team or a support team. And that's how I can get folks engaged. And I empower the living crap out of people. I'm like, yep, go ahead. You don't need my approval, right? Here's a rubber stamp. Just do it, right? Do it. If it breaks, we'll just make sure there's a rollback, right? And then I gauge that depending on the severity, right? Financial services, you got to be a little bit more careful. Startups, you can just roll with it and kind of push it there. But finding that lever, to me, as part of enabling, as part of reducing the window of tolerance and pain that people go through and all of these other concepts, that's what I look for in building out that culture.
So it sounds like, Mel, that your philosophy is people-focused. And if we get, people, it's one of the people process technology, as we always understand. You lean towards certainly that people dynamic. And if you get the right people, you drive them to the right outcomes as far as process and technology. I guess that embodies your philosophy. Do I have that right?
Oh, yes, all day long.
Now, but, how do you then actually take that and extend that further in terms of, like you said, do we have the right technology and tool sets? Do we have the right process? But given that there is a toxicity of out there, maybe in the environment, resources are hard to come by. How do you achieve the logical balance between process and technology with the people that you're dealt with, and you may not be able to affect immediately, right? To create true transformation, because it's always that balance, but organizations struggle with transformation.
I love that, and it's having done consulting a lot. I have an outsider view. A lot of folks have treated me like a priest or a lawyer, right? And they go into true confessionals, and I draw that out of them as well, right? So when I go into an org, I'm like, I need to know where the bodies are buried. I need to know the dirt. I need to know what's not working, right? Not so that I can fix it, but then I can understand where the landmines are. So when I approach folks, I need advocates, allies, and most recently I've gone to accomplices, right? I need to build the trust at every level, right? Up, laterally, and below, in order for me to make sure that I'm doing the best for the organization I'm joining. Right. It's not the best because I walk on water or some other bullshit, right? It's no, the organization has a goal. What's the goal? Where are we at? What are the other teams doing? I love cross-functional teams. That's the best for me, right? Because if I stay in a silo for security, or I stay in a silo for IT, or I stay in a silo for data, guess what? We're going to come up with those ideas, right? So the diversity, even within the cross-functional teams, is what I love. So making sure that I just broadcast it out there. I'm like, this is not my plan. This is our plan. Right. This is, I've executed on plans like these before. So I have a general framework or idea, but we've got to pull together within the organization. So it is about people all day long. Right. My head exploded 3-4 years ago when, we started to go through COVID, and all of a sudden, no offense to the industry, 5, 6, 20 books came out on EQ. I was like, wait, you didn't care about your teams before? I'm like, what the hell, right? So because I've lived it, right? I've lived the treachery and the extended hours and being on call and everything else. So I'm like, and I was looking for this type of leadership. I was looking for the leadership that was developing me. The leadership would say, hey, listen, you just pulled a 72-hour run. Why don't you take a few days off, decompress or whatever, right? But no, that didn't happen to a lot of folks, right? They would just, they would take they'd go to sleep and they'd pick up, 8 o'clock in the morning again, right? So knowing the thresholds, again, I talk a lot about the window of tolerance, right? How much pain are you willing to go through in a relationship? How much you're able to tolerate? If you bring that to a brimming point, guess what? Something's going to break, either family, financial, or your profession. So I can't consider myself successful if I'm bringing my teams to a point where they're all going to collapse, right? Or an organization. So it is about people. It is about also, as a leader, bringing in the right technologies, right? So being very agile in doing that, right? Don't stick with something just because it works, right? It has to be better year over year over year. So I push a lot of technology revamps, and you really try to get other tools to offset the noise and really stay ahead by working with startups. But for the most part, it's really just about advocates, allies, and accomplices, right? Who can I get that I can join their cause, or they can join my cause, and we can power through? How do we build a great freaking culture, right? That everybody's having fun, everybody's learning, and everybody's delivering value, right? Everybody I say this all the time, if you don't know what the OKR is, what the KPI is, why you're doing something, then just walk away.
Yeah. One of the things you said earlier, actually, I think you've said it a few times, where you're bringing attention to something that should have always existed, whether it's an AppSec program, whether it's this idea of having EQ. One of the things we've experienced probably in the last 5 years, and I'd love to get your take being on the other side of this, is as consultants, we've seen more and more enterprises that have been fairly slow to adopt certain paradigms now be thrust into a world that's completely different. And one of probably the easiest examples is going back to AppSec. When we've worked with organizations that traditionally were all COTS, wouldn't even consider doing much development, let alone forking an open source project and making it their own. Whereas now they are absolutely heavy with developers. They are steeped in a commitment to building value and owning that value. And now they're getting all of the dark side that comes along with that, in terms of securing it, where do you get your code, how much open source, so on and so forth. So a lot of vendors and startups and OEMs may have been experiencing that for some time, but now you've got these large enterprises that are just all in, and it's so impressive to see. From your perspective, what has that evolution looked like? Have you experienced some of that, and how do you help companies transition from maybe more traditional elements into this new vast manufacturing paradigm of software development and that kind of agility that goes with it?
Right. So I love this. I love this because I've been at startups since probably even before 99, right? But I had a great role where I wore a lot of hats at a small startup. You may have heard of it, Priceline, as they were going through their IPO. And it was great experience, right? And there were so many things that they were doing on point, with regards to development and message queuing and a lot of other things. And I continue to do that startup after startup, right? I continue to see the agile, and then I would flip over to a Fortune 10, or then I flip over to something else. And the process that I use is one of the things that I've kind of coined is MVE. Right? Everybody knows what an MVP is, but I say MVE, minimum viable effort. What are the low-hanging fruits that you can just get done really quickly, showcase, and actually prove, look, we can get this done quickly, right? So that as you build that up, that NVE, you create the baseline, you create the platform, you create the flow, you create the culture, right? And then you just transfer it over to the next team or the next team, right? So maybe if you've got 10 development teams, right, you start off with one, right? You start to change the culture of the pieces of what they're doing, how they're doing it. Then you take two, and then you swap them, right? So that they can teach each other. And then you keep growing that, right? There's great different ways to do that. You can go scaled agile, which there's a whole nother line of questioning on whether or not, that really works, right? But for larger organizations, they do need a little bit of structure. They need a planning. They need to kind of put milestones. So that could work for them. But there's so many other ways that you can create a culture where it's almost a self-fulfilling prophecy because everybody's hungry to do it. Right. And everybody's contributing to do it. So it's not a top down, command and control scenario. It really is. Here's the idea. Let's work it out. Right. You get the architects in, you get everybody in, having run 150 person, quarterly meetings on how do we blow out large scale programs. I know you get personalities and egos, but at the end of the day, if you can pull them all together, right, and deliver hundreds of $1 million in sales, hundreds of $1 million in savings, it's a win. So all of it really is just taking into account where the culture is, where the low-hanging fruit MVEs are, and just tackling them as you're continuing to plan the larger scale pieces. Has worked for me time and time and time again. And it's not easy to do, right? You've got to identify, you've got to figure out who those advocates and allies are, who's really in, right, as part of the planning and everything else. But I love doing it. I love doing it at scale, right? I love doing it at the point where it just becomes a natural element of the company culture. And that to me is like gold.
Yeah. Mel, too, just using that MVE concept, it's great. But you talk, going back and maybe tying this back to AppSec programs. So we find that organizations have, by and large, had an AppSec program. We won't say if those that haven't and are just getting around to it, but those that have struggled to maybe perhaps scale it out or deal with the volume of vulnerabilities out there. So if in your shoes, you've gotten to see a lot of these efforts and applying the themes of MVE, how do you think an AppSec program could evolve in your philosophy?
I've done this way too many times. For no scanning, no vulnerabilities, no fixes to building out a program that actually does address these, right? We all work in security. We talk about risk registries and risk management and scoring and FAIR. That's all cute. But at the end of the day, if you've got an organization that has no scanning, has a backlog, or they do, and they have a backlog of things that they haven't worked on, you're setting the wrong priorities, right? You're just wrong, right? You have to take in tiny increments, 2% of your sprints or of the workload, and start to address some of them. Then you take 5%. Then you take whatever threshold you can still deliver product and value and address the security issues, right? And if you can't do that, then you have to outsource it, right? You have to bring in the experienced folks to educate the teams on how to quickly address the vulnerabilities, right? At the end of the day, it's an investment in time, and the if you keep it in-house, the investment is in making sure that you can actually pull back on product delivery to a certain percentage and actually address the security, and then you rotate the teams through that, right? So it's not just one team addressing all vulnerabilities. Everybody's learning about what the vulnerabilities are, how they are. You pull in the right open source tools, the right additional tools to reduce the noise. You obviously have the right metrics and measures so that you know which ones are the ones that are affecting the crown jewels and everything else. But at the end of the day, it's all about culture. And if your top down isn't making the time to do it, you'll never get it done.
Yeah, that's pretty important, Mel. And And it's kind of like a dog chasing its tail a lot with a lot of programs out there where product delivery does not want to pull back to address maybe the threat, if you did threat modeling or kind of understand your overall application posture, if you will, right? So pulling back, I guess, is a cultural top-down model or framework or mindset that people need to espouse to say, hey, let's slow down to speed up, perhaps, right? And if we can get a set of group of applications coupled together, prioritized, and address the crown jewels applications and those vulnerabilities, perhaps we can have a cascading effect. Do I have that right in terms of what you mean to convey?
I do. And I will, like I said, I've been at companies where they're actually doing the scanning, but their backlog is so big that they don't know where to start, right? I've been at companies where genuine teams or key engineers want to attack those, but they're being pushed aside to work on product or delivery or some other legacy piece that some other tech debt that was there. Without that real view of what actually has to be addressed, right? The criticals and the highs, right? You're never going to be able to actually do them. The market and the industry right now is pointing everybody to it, right? SEC filing security. I'm like, hello, you can either do it now or you can pay a whole lot of money later, right? So the focus has to be on that. The focus has to be on getting the right tools to narrow down what you actually have to do, right? If you've got a million low-level things, yeah, you're not, right? Unless you've got, all the budget in the world to try to address those. But ranking them and getting the right tools in place to do that, and then building out that culture, you've got to get in there. I'm not kidding you. Forget about even vulnerability testing. I have teams that I've been into. They don't even have a QA person. Right. Mm-hmm. I'm like, okay, we need to walk this back, right? We need to do a little bit of QA, right? So they rely on use cases and test cases from the developer. That's cute. That's great. But guess what? We've got to add a layer. We've got to make sure that voice is in there. And then we've got to add another layer on top of that to make sure that we've got the vulnerability and the scanning and the best practices in there. You'd be surprised how easily and quickly you can actually turn a culture around that can focus on that, right? And can put the tools in. And I love the concept, whatever, 5-10 year shift left. Yes. Everybody at every point should have been doing this, but you can't do it if you don't have the right partners and the right tools.
So I'd love to explore another idea with you then, Mel. So and it's loosely related to all this. We've talked about all these groups and these teams and how to bring them together. So if we hunker down on team topologies for a moment, as soon as we started moving to cloud, it was, hey, you build it, you run it. And we moved to a product mode operation. We gave product teams a P&L and, hey, you're now responsible for this thing. Go make it profitable. Do what you need to. And we became polyglot everything, right? We had different persistence layers, different languages. And then, DevOps is dead, long live DevOps. And then platform engineering came in. And how do you start to bring this idea that, yeah, we want you to be proficient. We want you to have responsibility for your code, the security of your code, the testing and validity of your code, so on and so forth, and defining value for the company, while still bringing in a modicum of leverage and control and standards from a platform engineering team, and still having InfoSec be able to weigh in and have influence, and still have the SREs be able to still influence what goes into one of these sprints and working in error budgets and so on and so forth. How do you start to bring all of those ideas together? Because it feels like in some of our customers, they went really far in one way and now they're bringing it all the way back the other way. And it's how do you find the dynamic that works for an organization?
I alluded to, or actually very specifically mentioned it. I love working with cross-functional teams, right? I've been in organizations, large and small, where the tail end was InfoSec. And then guess what? That's not getting released because you didn't, check off the 5 things you were supposed to do, right? I've been in teams where yeah, no, they did the vulnerability scanning and there it is in the backlog, right? They didn't address it at all. We're like, yeah, we can't push this code out because in case you didn't see, you've got the top 5 vulnerabilities in your code base. Yeah, we can't release this because your authentication and workflow path don't handle XYZ, right? So the cross-functional piece, and I mean, again, it shouldn't be new news to people, but I'm surprised. You got to get everybody up front to be addressing these things, right? So InfoSec and legal are not your enemies, right? You've got to get them into that conversation early on, right? The one word I didn't want to use as you were talking, Darren, was governance, right? Because it's such a powerful word. It's just collaboration, right? What should we be doing, right, to secure the organization, right? You might have to put a little bit of a foot on the gas and kind of let people know and, hold their hand to the fire to say, by the way, we kind of have to do this ahead of schedule, right? And I have been able to find that balance where you don't have to add a lot of friction, right? As long as you've got the right checkpoints and the right pieces, right? So, the whole shift left piece, every developer, or as I like to call them, diva, doesn't want you to touch their computer, right? They've got a process, they've got a flow. And sometimes when you do, you break some of their flows and, maybe you have to get them to upgrade 3 versions of the operating system and get them some new equipment because they're so deadlocked on where they were. They don't have the time to maintain their own systems. But that's a cultural piece, right? You work with them and you kind of get that through. So yes, you do have to shift it as far left as you can without impacting the delivery, but getting that in as early as possible with the right conversations will save you at the tail end. And you can start to build up the frameworks and the structure, right? All these wonderful little words, right? That I hate using because they just sound so compliance driven. But in reality, you just create that flow. Right? How do I get this in here so that I don't disrupt the business, but also get what I need, right? And that's that magic that you have to work, right? It can take a year or it can take 2 years to get that through in an organization. It could take 5 years, but as long as you're moving towards that and you're starting to create a flow and that everybody's accepting, and yes, that extra half a second that it took you to compile something, by the way, you're saving the organization $100 million. Is it worth it if you're compiling 10, 20 times a week that you spare the 20 seconds? Maybe.
Mel, I think you've covered the essence of what we call DevSecOps quite well. Cross-functional teams, truly shifting left, and security not being an afterthought. It's indicative of how you lead and get people vested in terms of their on an emotional level, right, and personal level, and why you said what you did in the beginning is if you can get the people and the cultures right, then some of these things and the DevSecOps, the cross-functional teams and collaboration naturally take place, and people want to do the right things. And of course, that breeds process, and that ultimately allows right product or technology selection. I'd like to maybe also ask you one question before we switch to a broader maybe topic or beyond security. But before we do, we hear a lot of Gen AI these days, Mel. What's changing in the InfoSec space for you, or from your vantage point? And how does one start to address what is that threat landscape with Gen AI?
I love this conversation, said no one ever in security. Including myself. So, I had to put on a couple of hats in the last year, right? One hat, I'm the CIO. Like, oh my God, we so have to do this. Go for it. Let's figure out how we leverage it. How do we enable the business? How do we just really, really create more value for the customer or internal processes? So my head was just fireworks, like just right. On the other side, my liver was about to get crushed. My brain was oozing out of my ear. I'm literally at the beginning of the year, I said, use OpenAI to generate your OpenAI policy, because you're going to have to move just as fast as everybody else is moving. You're going to have to put in the right controls. You're going to have to look at all this depending on the company and everything else. And the way I look at it in both sense is, if as a security leader, I am not enabling the business, then I'm just an anchor, and I'm that governance guy, and I'm that compliance guy, and I'm the guy of no, right? I've always been a guy of yes, right? Yeah, and everybody says it, right? It's like, yes, but let's do it this way, or let's figure out how to put the guardrails. I'm all about guardrails all day long, right? Like, I can't just have people driving off the edge and going crazy. So from a security standpoint, I said this a couple of months ago in a session that I was with some other folks. I said, if you have not already enabled some form of AI in your organization for internal or external reasons, in the next 1 to 3 years, you will be out of business. Mm-hmm. End of story, right? And that's it, period, done. Because AI has the best advantages to being able to do things that you are spending tons of money on or can't do or otherwise. So if you're not enabling the business by creating the right policies, by making sure you educate, by making sure you bring it in-house, if you need to protect everything, or find the right partners that have the right silos, right? Then it's an absolute game changer all the way around. Anybody who says different, I would love to have a coffee with them for them to convince me. But at the end of the day, we have to be enablers, right? But we have to be careful about it. And as long as you're educating your organization, you're bringing in the tools internally, and you're working with the product and or internal OT or other teams, then it's just a freaking awesome field of discovery and optimization. So as long as you can stay ahead of it, right? Again, you've got to bring in the right tools, the right people, and you've got to have a little bit of bandwidth that you allocate towards that, then you're gold. So to me, that aspect of it is just an exciting thing, right? Everybody talked about RPA, 5-10 years ago, and optimizing and cost cutting, right? That's cute on the CIO side. On the CISO side, it's like, oh, we're embedding passwords. Well, who's got the connectivity? What's going on? Who's got the keys, right? Data lakes, right? Which, of course, I ended up rebranding as data swamps after the last 20 years, right? Oh, we've got data everywhere. Holy shit, that's great from a CIO standpoint, and from a marketing standpoint, and from an AI ML standpoint, from a security standpoint. Holy shit, we have data everywhere, right? Different tone, yeah. Right? You've got to pull it back together. You've got, subsets of data that people have access to. So you've got to pull in the right controls, the right measures, the right discoverability, classification, et cetera. We're in the same state. It's just rinse and repeat. Right. So whether or not you think of it as a CIO or as a CISO, it's the same conversation. You just have to make sure that you're the adult at the table to kind of set those guardrails.
Awesome. Now, Mel, going back to what I alluded to before, Digital Guardian. You are the founder of Digital Guardians, and this is your contribution back to the community. Can you share with us and our audience more about your efforts with that platform?
Oh, we could be here for days talking about this one. We're trying to make it short. Having been in the industry for a while, having lived through the drama, having seen the different levels, but then having to get exposure to levels that I didn't even know existed, kind of caused me to rethink a lot of things in the last 4 to 5 years. My contributions would be, right? And what I was doing that wasn't able to allocate time to do versus what I wanted to do. Long stories around that. We can get into conversations on that. But what I started to see was there was major gaps, right? Gaps between folks who want to break into IT or security, gaps in folks who are in IT and security, and then gaps in the senior leadership of the different groups. And those gaps consisted of a unified community that you can go to find all of the other communities or efforts, a single source that you can actually get as much information as you can to help you build and continue to grow, whether it's early, breaking in, or mid-tier. And then I said to myself, well, as a leader in the last 5 to 10 years, I've developed my teams, I've coached my teams, colleagues, up, down, left, right, across the things that I've learned. Why are all leaders doing that publicly, right? And I call leaders out, and I say by leader, I mean anybody who has a lot of experience. You don't actually have to lead teams, right? If you've got your certifications, or you actually lead teams, or you're a startup advisor or whatever, you're a leader. right? Because you've got knowledge that somebody else doesn't. So what I did was said, well, why isn't anybody else helping people, right, at these senior leadership roles? So I call leaders out. I was like, do you have half an hour a week that you could spare? Do you volunteer? Are you part of nonprofits that help educate and elevate? I'm like, well, this could be an opportunity for you to find an organization, right? You've got Year Up, Empower, Cybersecurity, Tech Impact, Gracie. There's hundreds of organizations just in the United States that you can actually target to be able to give back, right? Do we all? No, because we've got life and we've got this, we've got that. We don't make it a priority. So I'm calling people out. I'm like, okay, you need to contribute an article once a month or something. You need to help with a study guild for a study hall to help people get through some of these certifications. Hey, can you just chime in if somebody just last week somebody said, what would I need to do if I want to relocate from France to the United States for an IT role, right? Simple questions like that you can't really post on LinkedIn, right? Because people are going to look at you like, well, you don't know that, or and I'll tell you. Some of the other things that really drove me to the Fellowship of Digital Guardians was hearing stories like, hey, I was in this OpenAI, Discord channel, and, I'm new to all this. And this happened a month ago. They said, I posted, it's like, hey, how do I learn more about AI? Well, talk about newbie burning. They're like, Google it. Like that was the contributing. It's like, wow, that's just great. Way to build a freaking community where you're giving and you're sharing. I'm like, Google it. That's all you could say. You couldn't send a link or go to this other channel or here's another org. So that to me really pissed me off when I heard that, right? And I was like, join the fellowship, ask the same question. If I don't answer it, somebody else will. And I want to pull people together to do that. So that's what I mean by there's plenty of great resources out there, but people are shy. They don't ask questions. So I wanted to create a safe place where at every level, senior leader to breaking in, could ask questions, find resources, and branch out to all the other ones. I also am calling on all the vendors and all of the different event and conference pieces to say, hey, you want me to speak at that event? Is this event open to anybody mid-level without a C-suite title? No, it's not. Then I don't think I'm going to be able to join, right? Because I want exposure for the mid-level folks, right, who may not be managing teams, but have the aspirations and the skills to do so, to join and learn. So those are the kind of concepts that the fellowship wants to bring to every organization, every group, every nonprofit. And I tied that together with a few things. So number one, you need the community. Number two, you need the contributors. Number three, you need the courseware. So I have courseware in the Academy, over 150 courses on almost all of the major certifications, as well as a myriad of other pieces. I also have in there, part of this is scholarships, right? So the fellowship is a nonprofit. I pretty much went with the PBS sustaining member concept. So if you contribute, then you're actually giving scholarships to folks who may not be able to afford it, right? The study halls, right? So you have a guild that can set up a study hall so that an expert or somebody who may be contributing can help study for those certifications. And then the other piece that I'm working on now is the practical hands-on experience. Capture the flag, backdoors and breaches, all of these pieces. So you need the hands-on, you need the training, you need the studying, you need exposure. That's what the fellowship is. I'm working with some great programs to also build out courseware in Spanish, right? And how do you get your CISP if you live in Mexico or you live somewhere else, right? So I was born in Puerto Rico, and this is something that's really, really important to me. I've got a great partner who's doing phenomenal work. Guess what? Bring it. Let's put it on the platform. It's got courseware, libraries, events, everything. So to me, that's what the fellowship is about. I'm looking to pull in partners left and right.
Amazing, Mel. That's quite a bit there, and a contribution to society. So you're living what you preach as part of this discussion in terms of people and investing in people and building them up, and not only in your workplace but out in the community. That's a tremendous effort you've put forth, and I'm sure many people will benefit in their lives from this. And so we urge our listeners to take a look at Digital Guardians and appropriately contribute. So thank you so much, Mel, for being part of our show today. And we welcome you to come back and share more as things evolve, and in any which way we can support as well.
Yeah. Next time we'll get you here in person, Mel.
Yes, I need to be in that beautiful studio, but thank you both. Really appreciate it. And again, anything I can do to help you, help the community or otherwise, I'm open.
Excellent. Thank you.
Awesome.